My name is Monk Rowe, and we are filming in Toronto for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. It's a real pleasure to have Ray Drummond with me here. Composer and bassist, and band leader, and keeper of a neat website.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting that. I thought you'd say professor next. Budding professor.
Budding professor.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you just got a appointment.
Yes.
Where is that?
California State University, Monterey Bay.
Wow.
Which is the former Fort Ord. So the federal government gave it to the state of California, who in turn gave it to the California State University system. So up until this past semester, we were the newest of the California State University campuses. Mm-hmm. There's a new one now that has actually started this past September, so we're not the newest one, but we're one of the smaller ones. We only have 3,200 students. We're 8 years old.
Neat. How are you going to do that?
Well, I'm not moving back to the Monterey Bay anytime soon, except maybe to get a place 3-4 years downstream.
Okay.
Right now, my family has lived in the Monterey Peninsula for the last 40 years. So my pop passed away a couple of years ago, and so my mom's been living there and by herself, and so it's wonderful to see her prodigal son come back home.
Neat.
Back there to hang out with her for various periods of time, because it's a full-time appointment and tenure track. And
okay.
Yeah.
So you'll be doing some commuting.
Yes.
From coast to coast.
Yes, I have been commuting, as the old vaudeville joke goes, and my arms are tired.
Yeah.
Back and forth. I think 7 times since August.
Wow.
Back and forth, 7 or 8 times. So it'll probably continue maybe 5 times or so during the next semester. And then, of course, I'm free from the middle of May until the end of August.
Right.
So I've been doing plenty of other gigs, still working with people like Kenny Barron and Toots Dillman all during this time, of being there, and have some other projects that I'm involved in. One, a French project that takes me over there a couple of times a year minimum. And I would really like to get my own show back on the road, but that's had to take a back burner by necessity because there's so much else going on.
Yeah, it's hard to be a band leader.
Well, there are 2 parts to that answer. One, yes, these days it's more difficult to get gigs, primarily because most people are represented. So unless you're represented, it's not that you're at a disadvantage. It's just that people who are the presenters are more used to now working with people, managers, agents, than musicians. I mean, more and more now, the business has become more institutionalized. And so it's not that the presenters don't want to, but the presenters have gotten used to working primarily with, quote, other professional people rather than the musicians themselves. I think they feel more comfortable. They have their own little clacks and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So.
Right.
But that's the first part of the answer. The second part is one that's instrument specific. Bass players have not really been given much chance. They don't get the same chances at becoming band leaders that trumpet players, saxophone players, drummers sometimes seem to even are able to get what we call more play at becoming a leader, more opportunities to become a leader. Piano players are accepted as leaders immediately, that sort of thing. But it's kind of based, we have always been in the background, creating the heartbeats for groups that we perform with. And so, a bass player that steps out and says, I'm the leader. Okay, there's another component to that, though, and it has to do with the instrument itself. Because people don't really, in one sense, they don't listen to the bass as a melodic instrument in the same way that a piano or trumpet or saxophone or trombone or baritone saxophone even talk about instruments that are closer to the bass in terms of pitch. And so what has happened is that we now seem to have to fight to become band leaders. Charles Mingus is a perfect example of someone who obviously was a band leader, and yet he had to struggle and fight to be known. people still think of him primarily as a composer, and a composer who, with his band, played primarily his compositions. Yet on the other hand, you have the fact that he was obviously a leader. He obviously wanted to train other musicians, because that's, in my opinion, one of the functions of a leader, is to actually serve as a training ground. The kinds of bands that leaders have are ones where you actually have musicians in your groups who are going to become leaders themselves, go on to do whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing. Although there are some exceptions to that, and of course, like Duke Ellington, for instance, was not someone to particularly develop talent, but he could have, but because he was writing for those musicians individually, many of them decided, look at Johnny Hodges, for instance. Johnny Hodges was in and out of that band like a ping pong ball because of the fact that Duke always would write these wonderful, wonderful venues for him, these wonderful pieces of music, and sure, he could play it with his own group, but it just didn't have the same kind of impact for him, I think.
Right.
I think he got it. He just got a great feeling out of playing, Duke's music too. And so it's like, and Duke made sure that you had enough money to survive, So I mean, it's kind of like why bite the hand that feeds you,
That's right.
that sort of thing, and that also nurtures you,
Do you feel that some young jazz musicians become leaders too soon?
Oh, you get me started on this.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously. I mean, Clifford Brown was a leader. He died, he was 25, 26 years old when he died. But he was really a leader. He was a very responsible young man. To this day, LaRue, his widow, Clifford was the kind of guy, they were buying a home when he died. And he had homeowners insurance, life insurance. That's the kind of responsibility that he had. I mean, he understood if he did die, then the house would be paid for, and that's what happened. So, I mean, he had that kind of foresight and that sense of responsibility. And I, venture to say there are very few of these young musicians. I'm not going to call any names at this point because it's not about, a pissing contest or who's good and who's bad, but it's been very unfortunate that in the top-down theory that seems to be prevailing through the higher echelons of the not just the entertainment business but the jazz business, they seem to think that they need to not rely on the apprenticeship system that that actually served jazz quite well in the development of individual voices, and the development of individual leaders, too. And so when you come and you just pluck people out of line, take them out of line and put them in the wrong place in the line, you're really messing with a fundamental strength that this music, and a resiliency that this music has always showed. Because that's one of the things, if you start messing with the evolutionary scheme, then don't be surprised that you have some very serious, strange-looking hybrids and, genetically defective examples, in your bloodline now, Because, I mean, jazz has never been tinkered with in the way that it has been in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Is this whole thing here with the jazz convention in jazz education, is that in any way messing with the evolution that...
No, you're talking about the convention itself?
I'm talking about the concept, I guess, of, teaching jazz in a college.
No, none of that.
Okay.
No, there are two issues with this convention. I'm not sure that... First of all, you have to understand, I'm a political sociologist. That's my degree. That's my undergraduate degree was really in. And so I see two specific missions that aren't necessarily compatible. They're not exclusive, but they don't conflict with one another, but they have parts of each other that do conflict. Okay, on the one hand, this convention and this organization is about jazz education, okay? But on the other hand, this convention has now taken on an additional responsibility, especially now since the Jazz Times convention folded, or actually more accurately has folded a small portion of itself into this particular convention. So you've got really a pull between the commercial forces of the media, of the entertainment industry, meaning the record companies and other media companies that are interested in the commercial media. You've got them pulling at the educational because they're trying to get them to feed them, and yet there's a certain kind of dynamic that exists in in jazz education, because as you know, there's always been kind of a hidden war. It's not a war, but a hidden conflict between the musicians, professional musicians, and the educators, and which is really unfortunate. It's really ridiculous, because everybody's trying to do the exact same thing, which is to make the pie bigger for the jazz community. Mm-hmm. I mean, the musicians, not only are they looking for more venues, but they're looking for audience. The universities have the perfect opportunity to not only have musicians in music programs and whatnot, but to actually be a place where future audiences can actually learn something about jazz, classical music, folk music, world music, whatever. And then as they go out to become lawyers, doctors, dentists, police officers, whatever, diplomats, the point is that they have been exposed to other things and they begin to make, quote, informed choices.
Right.
So to me, it's obvious that the mission for both camps is exactly the same, but somewhere along the line, you got a lot of some people who actually say, oh, you're an educator. Oh, you're not as good as a professional, or a professional saying, you're an educator, so you don't think I'm as good as you. It's like, wait a minute, guys, what is this? It's very specious as far as I'm concerned, that part of it. So you have that happening. That's traditional. That's been part of this organization. That's part of the baggage that this organization has always carried with it. And then now you've also grafted this other media hype business that has got more muscle and more money in one sense, because it's more dynamic. So at least, and it's also the one that's tied in to youthful notions of what it means to be, quote, successful, unquote. Because success, we know, really doesn't have much to do. It has somewhat to do with commercial success, but that's not what we're really, as either educators or as professionals, jazz lovers, looking for. It's not so much. Most musicians, I don't think, come into jazz music because I'm going to make a killing, I'm going to be the next Rockefeller, I'm going to be the next Sting, I'm going to be the next Beatles. I mean, it's not on that level. It's usually, I have this passion for this music that I've always loved. It's nurtured me. It's gotten me through hard times. More importantly, it's something that's, I just feel compelled to actually be in this community and to try to acquire it and develop and deepen this voice that I think I hear or feel, or however it appears to you. And I think that this is the mission of educators as well. I think people that really, I have to be very candid in how I feel about education, because for the first time in 25 years, I'm back now in an institutional setting as a faculty member, and I'm really enjoying it again. But then I knew I would, because I like teaching, but I took myself off the market for 25 years because I wanted to be fully a professional musician. It wasn't that it was a problem being an educator, it's just I wanted to see what it was going to be like for me to be out there earning my own living without an institution behind me, without any of the, it's not a safety net. It's just a different way of being employed, It's a different relationship. You're still working for yourself, but you have another kind of relationship that you have to nurture. And the political aspects of being in the educational establishment that's a whole other thing. And it's similar to what you have to do in political aspects of your career as a professional musician, but it's a different. It's a different institutional setting.
Do you think you personally went, I'm not sure how to phrase this, went as far as you could in the performing world. I mean, you've had you've played with,
a gaggle of people.
A gaggle, thank you.
Yes.
Of a motley characters, which is something you said to me over the phone, I think.
Yes.
I wouldn't call them that. But
Desperados. All this.
Desperados.
Yes, Desperados,
Yeah.
everybody.
And you've had some recordings under your own name, and you've led your
Right.
own groups.
Have I gone as far as I could?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, I haven't really even scratched the surface
Yeah.
yet. In terms of I have a whole bunch of things on my plate with respect to being a performing artist. Productions, I'm talking about recordings primarily, that I would like to continue to do, that I would like to do over the next few years. Right now, I don't know, I woke up one day and decided that it's time for me to give back in a way that I haven't given back. I mean, I enjoy teaching, but I don't enjoy cranking out musicians. That I've never really enjoyed. And the reason for that is I like to be with young musicians, student musicians. I like to get them on track so that they can discover what they need to discover for themselves. Because ultimately, what I think the thing that I see in jazz education today is that it's not a question of anybody's right or wrong, but it's just, it seems to me that what we need to do is to empower the students to be able, for them to be able to then say, okay, now I've been exposed to a basic kind of template. But see, the thing that we don't tell the students in jazz education is, look, get your own personality, get your own sound. It's just not been a value that we've actually elevated to the same status as get your articulation together, get your knowledge of jazz history together, get your knowledge of your instrument together, get the kind of fundamental music business training that you need so that when you do come out with our degree, that you're going to have at least some of the tools necessary to actually be a professional. That's what we've been doing, which is great. But for these kids to really become not just successful jazz musicians, but to be what's the word? I can't think. It's not appropriate, but to be not well-rounded. There's a word I'm trying to find here, but in order to be, it's not successful. That's not the word I'm trying to come up with.
Relevant?
Relevant is closer.
Yeah.
Closer to be not just relevant, but in order for it to be real for each one of these musicians, they really have to come up. See, when I was coming up, and most generations before me, one of the main things we used to listen to the older guys, one of the things they used to tell us is, look, kid, if you don't do anything with your music, or your instrument, get your own sound, get your own ability to have a signature sound. Harry Carney, his own sound. Johnny Hodges, his own sound. Duke Ellington, his own sound. Bill Evans, his own sound. You hear a couple of notes. Oh, that's Bill Evans. Oh, that's Hank Jones. Oh, that's Paul Chambers. Oh, and the point is that was a really serious value. And even if we didn't, I can remember when I was growing up, and this is like 50s into the 60s, you play in some of these smaller bands, some of these big bands for some jobs,
Yeah.
Moose Lodge, the Elks, Bar Mitzvahs, whatever it might be, a band that was made up of half the guys were there was a couple of accountants and a couple of doctors, a couple of lawyers, some high school kids, a university kid, a couple of ringers, the professional guys that worked around. But this was a band that worked, in Monterey Peninsula. There was a band called the Del Monte Express that used to be like that. And I used to like to go and play bass with them sometimes, But when I first started playing with them, I used to play French horn with them every now and then. When they had some charts that needed some French horn, I'd go play with them. But the point was, there'd always be one or two guys in the band, like a third alto player or something, would stand up and play. He'd play a solo, but the solo would be written out. And this guy's probably a doctor or something, but it's written out, and he played a solo. He played the same exact stuff every time we played a chart, but it didn't matter because he stood up and took this solo, that was written out. But his sound was so wonderful. That's why we had him. That's why you have this guy do that, because he had this wonderful sound that he had taken the time to develop. not Coltrane. He's not ever going to become a professional musician. But he had this wonderful sound, and it was him. That was him, and he learned how to actually get a voice, and put it out there. And that kind of voice it's possible for anybody to have that voice. Anyone who is passionate about the music, whether they become a professional musician or not. And that really is instructive as to how I think the next level of jazz education needs to be, shall we say, augmented. We just need to find a way to bring personal voice up to the same level as all the other values that we're trying to instill in the students. Because in my opinion, as a professional musician, as I'm working with the product of the jazz education system for the last 25 or 30 years, that's the one thing that I'm really disappointed about saxophone players. It doesn't matter, and we're not talking about instrument specific here. We're talking, because I'm talking, I ran on my website about, bass players, how they go, it's like they're going into a supermarket and going to a white can, and the can is marked generic bass sound. And so they take the can home and open it up, and that's them, because it's young guys playing with microphones. And you say, I'm only going to play with a microphone, no pickups, no amps. So then you say, okay, great, do that. So you listen to recordings, you say, who is that? You can't differentiate, because they're all, the sound that they get on the instruments are exactly the same. And then I'll listen to Rufus Reed, Ron Carter, Buster Williams, Cecil McBee, George Mraz, John Patitucci. All these different guys will actually, they might play through a pickup on a record. They might play on a stage through an amp with their own pickup, their own bass, all the setup. 2 notes. Oh, that's Ron Carter.
You can still tell.
Of course. Yeah. Even with this electronic, so-called electronic, the personality is right there.
Where does that come from? How do you teach that?
That comes from elevating the idea, the concept of get your own voice, regardless of what you're going to do with it. Because they used to say, look, anybody can practice, anybody can become somewhat proficient on an instrument. I mean, if you have any kind of musical talent, it's not a question of whether or not you really use this entire amount of information that you've now gotten from practicing in order to run your scales and run all this fancy stuff around. I mean, I have to say somebody that's almost a perfect example is somebody who has his own sound, and obviously is a wonderful saxophone player, but ain't telling us nothing. It's Kenny G is a good example. The boy is obviously a good saxophone player, there's no question, but he has no knowledge of jazz history. The boy, from what unless this is one of those take a page from the bebop book, so I'll tell people anything, because they'll think I'm crazy or weird or out of it or whatever, because some of the things he said, especially with respect to jazz history and respect of jazz, of older jazz, I'm talking about the tradition of jazz tradition, are just ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous, and certainly he's not a jazz musician, but he does improvise, and he does have a certain kind of sound that he obviously has taken time. I heard him play tenor one time on a record, and it's very interesting, because it's like he's using the same format, same template, and the same sound actually in a tenor. It just sounds like Kenny G playing tenor,
Yeah, I noticed something on your website. You said, where's the jazz and smooth jazz?
Yeah, well, don't get me started on that. Because the smooth jazz. I see, jazz is a Big Ten. And there's nothing wrong with jazz being a Big Ten. I don't have a problem with that. The problem I have is when the non-jazz people try to take jazz, not only the term, but try to usurp the tradition to make the tradition appear as if it actually sprung from what they're into, this little popcorn stuff that they're into, that has nothing to do with art. It just has to do with entertainment. It has also to do with a commercial kind of marketing approach, and in other words, a 20th century, the post 20th century kind of approach to entertainment, as opposed to arts, to art. And so then when people in education are trying to study this, unless you're very clear-minded about it and you design your programs in a clear-minded way, it's very easy for people, including musicians, to be confused as to what is entertainment, what is art, what are the histories of these various things, the pulls that are involved. I was in an elevator this morning. It was really funny. There were some young musicians, high school, maybe younger university students, like freshmen or sophomores. And one guy was saying to the other guy, I'm just standing in an elevator, and guy says oh man, Kenny G, that's one of the saddest musicians. Boy, the guy can play saxophone. He really can. But man, my parents have the Christmas album. They played that when I was home. Man, that is horrible. Can't say, really? Oh, it's terrible. You wouldn't believe how this sucks. I said, oh. I said, now here's these young guys. Nobody's, putting anything down there, their gullets or anything,
Yeah.
And this guy's telling his friend, like, man, this stuff sucks, man. What is this? And he didn't even say bird or train or anything. He just, man, this is horrible music. Just terrible, And of course, on the other hand, there's a white cat too, white kid, And it's on the other hand, I'll show you black folks that I'll take you to some places and introduce you to some people and say, tell me, how do you feel about Kenny G? And they'll say, oh, Kenny G's so wonderful, his music is so stirring to me. But he does have a sound.
Yeah.
He does have a sound, and
he's got some formula that apparently
that he stole from
some people.
That he took from Grover Washington, of course.
Yeah.
Grover is the one that really is the inspiration for Kenny G. If he would just say that would make me, then I would get off my high horse,
Yeah.
Really say, well, okay, the boy, no matter what he's doing, at least he's honest about where he got his, where he's stealing it from. Duke Ellington would tell you in a minute. Yeah, I stole that from Tchaikovsky, and I took that from Fats Waller, and I took this. And I just heard this somewhere. I probably stole it from somewhere, but I don't know where I got it from. It's just, because Duke used to say that, good composers borrow, the best composers steal. It's the way it is.
Yeah. Well, you moved around a lot as a
military
life.
Army brat.
Yeah.
Army brat.
Did that have any effect on your choice of career, or?
I don't think so. No. Because the fact that my father was a musician in World War II initially. He went into the Army as a musician. He was a saxophone and clarinet player, and then he decided, I guess, a couple of years into the military, they didn't call him up into. He was in the Army, but in the military bands, and he had an opportunity to become a Tuskegee Airman. They were going around looking for pilots, people that were interested in flying, and he signed up for that and became a Tuskegee Airman, and was a bomber pilot, but didn't serve in Japan. They were getting ready to ship out, I guess, when World War II ended, and so he never did get a chance to see any action there. Then he became a reserve person and went into the Army. The government, DOD was created, Defense Department was created. It's 1947, so anybody who was reserve was asked, okay, now you're a pilot. Do you want to go into the Air Force, or do you want to stay in the Army and into Army Aviation? So he decided to stay in Army Aviation. And then he was called back up to active duty in Korea when the Korean War broke out. And so we wound up going to Germany, actually, in 1951. So from that point on, then we started moving around all over the place, from one Army post to another. So 14 schools in 12 years.
Wow.
Graduated from the same school I started in, which was in Nuremberg, Germany.
I'll be darned. You did a circle?
I did a whole circle through 13 other schools.
Oh,
I started in the back, Nuremberg Elementary School, first grade, and then I graduated in the front 12 years later from Nuremberg Senior High School.
Uh-huh.
So got the diploma to prove it.
All right.
Class of 1964.
Yeah.
Which also included Diane Wiest. She was the Colonel Wiest's daughter. She was. I have my yearbook, Nuremberg High School yearbook. I still have it in my house. And on this page, I'm sitting there, the full-size picture of the outstanding singer in music, Ray Drummond, with his French horn and my little narrow, skinny tie from 1964. And here's this other page next to it. You open it up like that, and here's this full-size picture of a girl, a teenager who's all made up for Pygmalion. She was the main character in Pygmalion. You know, I forget it. She's supposed to be a gypsy or hobo or something like that. Some kind of. Anyway, she's all made up in character, and that's Diane Wiest. Nuremberg High School, class of '64. Yeah, so it's really amazing. I got to call her because she lives in New York as well.
Uh-huh.
I haven't seen her since graduation.
Whoa, that'd be neat.
Yeah, yeah. But I have her. I can get in touch with her because we both belong to the.
You played brass instruments, and then did someone push you to the bass for some reason?
Yes. In California, my junior high school teacher, who had pushed me from the trumpet to the French horn, needed some bass players for the school orchestra for the summer school, as I was going from junior high school to Monterey High School, and so, but we were rehearsing in the high school. So he came to me and he said, "I need bass players. Are you interested?" And I said, thought about it, but he knew if I said yes, then I'd take the bass home, practice it well enough to get past the concert, because I was always diligent. About that sort of thing. So finally, I said, "Yeah, okay, I'd do it." Mr. Buffo, Melvin Buffo, and who is still, thank goodness, alive and well in Monterey Peninsula, California.
And you got a degree in sociology, but
political science, actually.
Political science, sorry.
Yeah.
You decided not to pursue a career in that at that time?
No, actually, I took a job for 2 years as a personnel interviewer, management trainee for Allstate Insurance Company. Worked in two regional offices, actually. I was also the affirmative action officer for the two regions, and I was also a personnel interviewer. So I was a personnel grunt for them, and in the management rotational program, which was very interesting. And Chicago-based company, Northbrook, Illinois, Sears and Roebuck. At least at that time, they were definitely all totally owned by Sears. I don't know where they are now, but in terms of being owned. But it was very interesting. First job out of college, and I did it for 2 years, and then I decided that I wanted to take advantage of an opportunity I was living in downtown Palo Alto, California, and my wife was working at Stanford. My first wife was working at Stanford in the sociology department. Actually, she was the secretary to the head of the sociology department. And so I found out about an opportunity of a fellowship for the Stanford Business School, and so I applied, and you take your GREs and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, I won a fellowship, Council on Graduate Management Education, for 2 years of study, the 2-year program, the MBA program at Stanford. And so I went for 1 year. They were paying everything: tuition, food stipend, rent, books, everything. It was all I had to do was go to school for 2 years, and I was very unhappy with my colleagues. Time 1970, so we had a lot of Vietnam Navy pilots, especially, coming back, and they were coming into the classes. There were a lot of them too, and my father was a Vietnam veteran. Also, what had happened with Papa's, in aviation, he started with fixed wings, and then fixed wing aircraft, and then in the early 50s, the Army started adopting helicopters for their use, and Pop went into helicopters. So He became a commander because he was a colonel when he retired. But Pop was a chopper commander. So when he was transferred at the end of my freshman year, the summer that I went back to Germany between my freshman and sophomore year, he got orders to Vietnam, and so he was the first group of the big buildup of choppers that they started to ship over to Vietnam for the war. So we picked up the summer of '65 and went back to the peninsula. Of course, I was going to school. I had finished my freshman year already in Claremont, and so I was just coming back to California anyhow. But now the whole family went back, and then Pop went on to Vietnam. But he wound up he was there for about 15 months, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Got a Purple Heart and all that sort of stuff. But he was really gung-ho trying to get me to go, because I was in ROTC and all that sort of stuff. But I couldn't see going.
Yeah.
And through a lot of other circumstances, I wound up not going. But point was that in B school here, I've got these pilots coming back, and they're all like, oh yeah, we really, we're Vietnam veterans, and most of these guys were in carriers, took off every day. By that time, 1970, there's hardly any SAMs, surface-to-air missiles coming up at them, and the MiGs, there were no MiGs anymore. They'd shot all the North Vietnamese MiGs down.
Right.
I mean, the 60s, early 60s, when my father was there, 65, 66, 67, that's when those guys got creamed. That's when McCain wound up getting shot down, and all these guys were shot down, and POWs and all. But from 1969 on, there was no resistance in the skies. Americans did whatever they wanted to do, So anyway, to make a long story short, these guys are coming back all cocky and all this kind of. And I said, wait a minute. If I get this MBA and go off in that direction, I'm going to wind up. These are my significant others. This is my good old boy network.
Uh-huh.
I got to call that. Can I say asshole?
Uh-huh.
I'm going to have to call that asshole and say, okay, look, I got a deal here with my company and blah blah blah. Or I'm going to sit on the board of directors across from him. He's saying, yeah, well, I think we need to do this. Man, you were an asshole in Stanford. You're still an asshole. Why do I have to listen to this bullshit from? This is not right for what we need to do as board of directors up here. So, so I said to myself, well, if that's the way I feel, I need to think about what I really want to do with my life. Of course, I've been playing all the time, playing gigs and bar mitzvahs and weddings and, big bands and even doing jazz gigs. I mean, I was up playing with different jazz musicians, both locally and occasionally, do something with somebody that's, more known. I was even playing, for instance, Monday nights with Chet Baker. Chet Baker got out of prison, and his mother was living up in Milpitas, around just north of San Jose. And I used to go over to, Chet's mother's house, and we would rehearse. We had this Monday night gig in a pizza parlor in San Jose.
No kidding.
And later Chet moved up to San Francisco, and so he had me working. I only lasted a couple of nights, a couple of Mondays, or I forget how often he was. Yeah, it was every week in San Francisco, and I only lasted there for about 2 or 3 weeks because by that time I was already a musician up there.
Uh-huh.
And listen, and it was so ridiculous because Chet was really trying to just score. Trying to get some stuff together. So sometimes we wouldn't even get paid.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, it was just some silly stuff. So I said, man, later for this. But in San Jose, earlier, I do things like that. So I said to myself, that's really something that I really enjoy doing, just playing the music. And of course, I'd been learning tunes and writing things, and I learned how to play piano, and had this, record collection that kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And because I've been collecting records since I was about 9-10 years old, and just enjoying the music. Like I told everybody in the clinic, I was a listener long before I was a performer, and I've chosen never to lose my listening chops, never.
Tell me about working with Bobby Hutcherson.
What do you want to know?
Well, is it different playing behind a
the texture? The texture is different.
Yeah.
Saxophone player, that's a reed. When you have a bar that's vibrating, that's different. If the guy out front is like Ron Carter playing his piccolo bass, that's a different timbre.
Mm-hmm.
I've done those. I've played with Ron as the bass player.
Yeah.
And it's fun. I enjoyed it, but it's different. Piano trio, or piano led band, is different. Trombone led, like if you work with Steve Turre, for instance, the timbre is different. You do make an adjustment, but I'm sure the adjustment is a very subtle one.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of where you place time or stuff like that, there's no change from that. But there are color changes. Yes, I would definitely say that there's some kind of a difference. Like, and even within individual instruments, if I were to take the gigs I played with Bobby Hutcherson, the gigs I played with Milt Jackson, the gigs I played with Steve Nelson, they all have such individual personalities, although they're all in that, it's like Bags evolved into Bobby Hutcherson, evolved into Steve Nelson, So even though there's that common thread, they're from the same trunk, from the same branch of the trunk. Yeah. Their individual styles are so the color of their music.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the color of their notes, but it's really the color of their music is so different that you play. There are some very, very subtle changes that you make in your music. What they are, I can't tell you.
Yeah, it's hard to put.
But I don't. I mean, I don't play. I don't have the same template with everybody that I play with.
Yeah,
I don't. I don't use the same. I use the same approach in terms of I'm Ray Drummond, who's feels this way and who hears this way, and I do that consistently. But the name of that game, I mean the range of that game, is totally dependent on the music itself,
mm-hmm.
on the selections, that the kind of music that we're going to play, because I love all kind of music, and just to start with jazz alone, I won't even get into the things I like to listen to, but I don't want to play. But jazz, I mean, and I got some funny stories with respect to how, in one sense, it's been kind of a labor to expand my not just understanding, but my appreciation of musics that. I'll give you examples.
Yeah, please.
For instance, first time I heard, I was a senior in high school in Germany, and I went down to PX and bought this record, Bill Evans, Sunday, live at the Village Vanguard. I brought that back home, Scott LaFaro, Paul Mulchin, put it on. Now, Bill Evans for me was this guy who used to play with Miles back in the late 50s, and he's on a couple of Miles's records. And I remember he also used to play people like Jimmy Giuffre, Tony Scott. There were some people, I remember that, but I never had any of those records. I just remember hearing a couple of things and, kind of enjoying it. And sort of West Coast-ish, but no, not really, but, because I never listened to anything with his Bud Powell roots, which is where Bill Evans really came out of anyway. But, so I buy this record, put it on, and they're playing, I guess the first tune is Glorious Step, and then it goes on from there, various tunes and not whatever's on the record, but Alice in Wonderland and all sorts of other things. And I'm saying to myself, what's wrong with these guys? Because I'm thinking, Wynton Kelly and Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb or Philly Joe and Wynton Kelly and Paul Chambers and Percy Heath playing with Mickey Roker and all this kind of thing. Ray Brown with Kenny Clark and John Lewis and Milt Jackson and stuff. And here's these guys playing, and then they get into musical conversation. Man, these guys don't swing. What's wrong with these guys? There's no ching ching. This is some sad. Boy, I paid $2.35 for this LP in the PX, brand new LP. Boy, in 1963, I got robbed, I put, now, we lived about 60, 70 miles away, about 120, 130 kilometers away from Nuremberg. So we had to go in on Sunday nights, stay in the dorm all week, and then Friday night, we get on the bus and go back home for the weekend. So senior, in high school. It's my last year in high school. So about 2 months later, I walk in the house on Friday night, and something tells me, go get that record. Go get that record. And I'm going, oh man, I'm so sad. It's nothing in this. I put it on. It's like, whoa. Suddenly it made all the sense in the world. Obviously I'd been thinking about it subconsciously, unconsciously. Ornette Coleman was the same way. Took me a little longer for Ornette, but the first record I bought from Ornette, I can't even remember which one it was, but I'd have to look at my library because it's a European pressing of the Ornette record, and I put that on, and I didn't get back to that for a couple of years. I didn't understand what that was all about. And then one day I put in one of Ornette. It wasn't that record; it was another record somewhere, and I put that on. I said, "Oh man, whoa, where have I been?" I mean, it's because it's gorgeous. His music is gorgeous. Once you really understand it, it's not about all this traditional kind of, like what I did a clinic on today. It's rooted in the melodies and the rhythms, but the rhythms are not supposed to be as hard and fast, and they're not supposed to be as repetitive as some of the other traditional kinds of music are. And when you finally begin to understand the emotional depth, as well as the difference in approach for articulation, the difference in approach for harmonic development, the difference in approach in terms of how you block out your phrases, the kind of phrasing that you use is definitely jazz. I mean, Ornette Coleman is Charlie Parker. There's no question. Charlie Parker might have played what Ornette plays if Charlie Parker had continued to move on, and I mean, could have the self-destruction that Charlie Parker might be similar to Train's self-destruction in terms of the increasing harmonic and technical development that both of them obviously were moving along as they were continuing their careers, and which goes in two directions, because simultaneously it goes toward increasing complexity, and on the one hand, it goes to increasing simplicity simultaneously. Almost in a Zen kind of a response.
What's the of the recordings you've done? Does one stand out as being, let's say, the least structured? And was it a challenge?
No, I can't. I can't come up with any.
Can't place.
No, I can't think of him, because no structure is just as structured as the most complex structured, to me.
Say that again.
Okay. I'll say it again.
Yeah.
Having no structure is just as complex as having the greatest amount of structure, or the greatest detailed structure. So in other words, if somebody writes a chart that's totally through composed, everything has to be read. There's no improvisation. In other words, you're in jail interpreting this chart. And on the other hand, if you have absolutely nothing to go on, let's just say somebody says, we're going to now do avarice. That's our theme. Now you guys come up with avarice. That's just as complex as going through this totally written out chart. That's my point.
Okay.
And which brings me to the real principle, which is good music is good music, lousy music is lousy music, just like Duke Ellington said.
Yeah.
It's to me that's it. So I can't think. I mean, most of the projects that I've been involved, I haven't really had too many projects from hell. Somebody asked me last night at dinner, tell me about one or two of your not projects, but was it recordings? No, gigs from hell.
From hell.
And I had to think about it. I could think of some with the working conditions or the living conditions or something with a drag, but generally speaking, I can't really think. I can think of a couple of times when the music was really a drag, but I wouldn't call that from hell. It just was a drag because, I took this gig and I'm working with this guy, maybe duo, and he turns out to be a real asshole, a real jerk. And up to that point, he'd been a friend, and we'd even played some and whatnot. But he got so into something else that it spilled into the music, and the music was being just kind of shunted out by whatever obsession was stuck there. And I got angry because of that, not because of either pissed off at him in friendship or lack of friendship or anything, but just because he was being so disrespectful to the music.
I see.
So
you play on one of my recent favorite CDs, and that's with Ray Bryant, a tribute to his piano friends.
Oh, you have that?
Man, I love that record.
Wow. I haven't seen that. See, that reminds me, I need to talk to Ray. I haven't talked to him in probably a year. I mean, we've worked together even longer, but I really need to call him up and talk to him. Yeah, because I mean, there's another precious resource, folks.
Yeah. And
he's still here, and the people who get to hear him the most are the Japanese, because they bring him over for the Golden Fingers concerts every year, every 2 years.
Junior Mance and those fellas.
Junior Mance, and this year Reni's going, and again she's going, and of course Kenny Barron, who is here.
Kenny Barron is here.
He is here. He's here at the fest. I haven't seen him, but they tell me he's camped out here, wandering around. So I got to go hang out with my old drinking buddy.
Well, I'll be looking for him, actually.
Yeah, he's here. He's not doing anything. He's not a clinician. He's not a performer.
When you said we were talking about people stealing, borrowing, etc., other composers.
Right.
Who are the people that you borrowed from on the way up?
Me? Oh, I steal from. I don't borrow from anybody. I steal. I do
Yeah.
steal. Bartok. I have a tune. I don't know if you're familiar with a record of mine called The Essence on DMP with Hank Jones and Billy Higgins trio recording. And I wrote a tune. Well, the title tune, The Essence, is Bartok's String Quartet #1. It's the principal theme that opens up the quartet. Dee-dong, dee-dong, just those 4 notes. And I took the very same notes. I didn't even transpose it. Took the very same notes and wrote this tune, The Essence, behind it. Another time I have an improvisational theme on a Beethoven String Quartet, number 12 in E flat. The principal theme. Let's see. I think it's from the second movement of the theme of that. I wrote a couple of minor blues actually. Wrote them actually for George Coleman, but we never recorded them. And I recorded one of them on my very first record. So it's called OJ. It's the name of the tune. But my first record was called Susanita. It's never been a CD. It's still vinyl. That old.
Those things that go around.
Those black things that go around, Well, I guess sometimes the fantasy made them red or yellow or purple or something like that. Some of those. It's fun.
Wow. Have you ever had an instance where you wrote something and you were thinking, this came from somewhere, but it was a while before you placed where that maybe a little piece of musical inspiration came from?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. I mean, I can't think of anything right off the bat, but I mean, there, as a composer, the whole process of composing is such a incredibly complex. I mean, it can become very simplified on one level, but the process itself is a pretty complex sort of system, because I mean, I've composed songs. I mean, I have sketchbooks filled of ideas, and from time to time I'll pull out an idea and say, "Oh," and complete it, because it's obvious that I was pointing at something. Now I hear the whole thing. I just play it and say, "Oh, oh."
Cool.
That's
you write at the piano?
Yeah, write at the piano. Can write at the bass. Sometimes I write without, anything around. That doesn't happen very often,
Yeah, it's
but
a
it
little
has
harder.
happened a couple
Yeah.
of times where all of a sudden something comes to me and I just write it out. But the piano has probably been the resource that I've used the most for composing. One of these days I'm going to get Finale totally under my fingers.
Yeah.
That'll become a composing tool for me. Either Finale, Sibelius, or one of those programs.
Yeah.
Because they've become highly evolved now, and they can be used as a composer's tool rather than just. I know, for instance, Kenny Werner uses the computer a great deal in composing. You know, for a time Billy Hart and I used to play together in Kenny's trio, and during that time he had just discovered how he could compose with a Mac PowerBook and the Finale. So he was in a keyboard, so small synthesizer keyboard, and so he was taking that on the road, writing all sorts of stuff out, because you can print it right there and try to play it later.
I was looking at your website, and I found it interesting that you put Lincoln's Gettysburg Address in there.
That's the current offering.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to revisit that speech now. Did you come across it again and then make a connection, or something you thought of?
No, it's something that the Gettysburg Address for me has always been a very important thing. Not because it signaled the end of slavery. It also signaled the end of separatism, meaning the South asserting its contention that as a Confederate group of not states, I don't want to call them states, provinces, or as a group of individual former states, that we have the right to separate ourselves out, even though we said initially that we were going to be part of this United States, just because we don't like the way that you guys are telling us how we're supposed to be running our affairs down here. And that included slavery, quote, states' rights, because, a lot of people, it's that's one of the crosses that we bear as Americans anyway, trying to figure out our sins that we need to really atone for, because we haven't atoned. Slavery is one of them. Various other things that we've done to people. I'm talking about within our country, under the guise of either states' rights or the majority rules or whatever. There's several levels of redress that we still need to address as a nation. So to me, that has always been the epitome of one of the challenges that still remains in front of us. Lincoln threw down, basically he said, look, this is what this nation's really all about. And so that's what you need to keep in front of you. So no matter what you do, and no matter what when you start to bow down to those who have died, who have laid their lives down for us to get this far, don't forget this is where we're supposed to be going. No matter where you think we've been or where you think we are, that's where we need to go. That is all. Ever since I first heard the Gettysburg Address in elementary school, it always stuck with me. It's like, damn, that is the shit. That's the shit that when I grow up, that's what I want to do for a living.
Are you optimistic about the country addressing some of those things that you mentioned in our past?
I'm personally optimistic, but I'm secretly cynical. Not pessimistic, just cynical, in the sense that for so long, de Tocqueville really had it right when he talked about some of the failings of our country. One of them being that we like to put our head in the sand whenever we confront a serious, quote, problem, unquote, that we tend to want to run away from it. We want to renounce things that are American. We're so busy inventing things and constructing things that we'll just do it and then walk away from it without trying to learn the lessons of it, without whether they succeed or fail. I mean, we don't learn either way. I mean, it's a particularly American kind of trait, because we're so busy creating, so busy going on to the next signpost, that we don't like to look behind us to see what's really going on. We don't like to study what we're doing at the moment when we do it. I mean, these are things that democracy in America, I mean, we're talking early 19th century here. This guy busted us for that, and we haven't really gotten out of any of that. It appears that, things like the common good, the public welfare, those concepts are really dead now. It seems also that the protection of the public from the tyrannies of corporate greed, the tyrannies of market manipulation, the tyrannies of the lack of consumer protection and the lack of environmental protection. I mean, all of those things, and this has nothing to do with the current political regime. It has all to do with things that have actually gone on since maybe the end of the Johnson administration. And I mean, I'm really arguing that it started long before that, but the point I'm trying to raise here is that this is not something that's either a Democratic or a Republican kind of problem, that there's been one party or the other that's been responsible for all the scalawags running around here today. But it's just that there has been an undeniable drift to neglecting the real problems that exist in our country at the moment. Racism is an obvious one. Sexism is an obvious. Classism is an obvious. Those are obvious, But things that aren't so obvious, the denial of basic education to everybody, and it doesn't matter whether you're coming from a school district, a public school district that has a lot of money, or a public school district that doesn't have very much money. I can tell you, I don't have to tell you because you see it too. The kind of students that we're getting from these school systems, it's unbelievable. And I've been gone 25 years, and I've finished my first semester, and I'm looking at these papers coming in.
Bet you were shocked.
I am totally shocked.
Yeah.
I had no idea that the level of intake. I mean, these kids, they don't know anything. Compared to what it was, just a Rust Belt blue collar kid coming into university had better speaking, writing, arithmetic skills, knew more about life than any of these kids do, And now the best students are kind of similar to some of the best students, but it even becomes skewed with them, because you can see certain little things that they don't quite have that the best of the best students that you would see had. And that's like, whoa, wait a minute, what has happened? And I mean, I've talked to my mother who retired as a middle school teacher. My mother's a great, I'm not going to get into that too much, but my mother raised 6 kids, and she went to school and broke her mother's heart because she had me. She got married and had me at the end of the war instead of finishing her college education, because she was, a year away. She went to a small black college, female college, Talladega College in Alabama. Met my father, and he swept her off her feet, and I was born when she was 20 years old and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, the point was that she had these 6 kids, and she decided to go back to San Jose State after being gone from college for 35 years. Wow. 25 years, raising kids. And they actually looked at her transcript, and they said, we'll admit you as a second semester junior, And she said, "You will?" She said, "Yeah, we'll take your credits and everything." So she wound up becoming a teacher and doing student teaching in the Monterey Peninsula School District, and wound up becoming a teacher, and then was there 20 years, put in 20 years, and gets her retired.
Really neat.
You know? So, I mean, I just look at that, and I've talked to her, and I said, "What's going on?" She says, "Raymond, that's the way it is." She says, "It's just, it's unfortunate, but, the kind of standards have just really..."
Does it have anything to do with attention span, do you believe?
I think attention span, in part, is produced because of the media's, it's just that media and the pace of our lives, you know. I don't think it's genetic, or I don't even think it's really culturally induced. I think it's just the pace that everybody has to now live a daily life is such that you don't have time to actually have a longer view, One of the reasons that I left the business world, that left Stanford, was something that I actually had seen at Allstate while I was there. I was there from 68 to 70 for 2 years, and I left because I could not believe the short attention span that was now developing in American business. When I first got to Allstate in 68, one of the most important parts of the company in their planning effort was they looked at 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, and the 5-year plan was in service of the 10-year plan. So the annual plan was in service of the 5-year plan, but the 5-year plan was most important. 10-year plan was important too, and the 1-year plan was important to get to the 5-year plan. But the most important thing was the 5-year plan. By the time I left Allstate in September of 1970, the quarter was not even as important as each week. I'd see that in our monthly, well, not monthly, but in our weekly Monday morning meeting, because you have to understand, Allstate Insurance Company, this is the region. It's not a district office or anything. The Menlo Park Regional Office, which is Northern California. The Sacramento had the rest of Northern California and Nevada, so I had to cover both of those regions. Anyway, the point was, I'd go to the Menlo Park meeting because that was my home gig, and by the time I left, our weekly meeting would generally have all the managers trying to make their numbers look the best for the previous week, and the estimates for this coming week were more important than what they were estimating for the month, the quarter, the year. 5 years. What? 5. What is that? 10 years. Whoever. 10. What? 10 years exists? And so it's like, I saw that and I said, it's over. American business is finished. There'll be creative this and that, but as far as creating anything, you can't. You don't run a business day to day. The business is run because you have a vision that you're a creative person, but you're a business person. And business people don't just make money. They make the money because they have something that somebody wants. And somebody wants it not because you're forcing it down their throat. Somebody wants it because they can use it. It's something that's made well that somebody wants. And they're going to go out and get it. Now, that upsets traditional marketing. Now, and when I say traditional, I say marketing since the 50s, since post-war. Because post-war, everybody's now thinking, they've been taught all these wonderful concepts about how to manipulate mass markets and how to influence people through the media, through media manipulation and this and that and the other. And it works for a time, but eventually it runs out of gas for each product. So when you have a product that's not made well and it's then forced down people's throats, eventually it peters out. A product that's made well, that's priced well, that stands up, that the company stands behind, continues on. It does. There's no question. Even if the product is obsolete, people will still vote to to use that product because it works. It's convenient. It's priced well. You know, American business is like, and it's an infection that's going around the rest of the world. You know, I mean, the Japanese resisted as long as they could, but they're, you know, they're. It's not even about money either. That's what makes it so sad. Because it's not really. Ultimately, it's really not about how much we made or how much we didn't make. It's really about. It's really about how much did we give to our stockholders. You know.
Yeah.
And that's such a game that's being played. I mean, we see the results of that game.
Yeah.
How you know, and right now there's a big cover up going on because it's not about what happened in Enron and those guys. It's about what's going on with the rest of all these, you know, jacklegs, as James Williams says. You know, because everybody's trying to figure out a way that they can make sure they can cover up all their tracks because everybody's been doing the exact same thing as all these other companies. I mean, that's what they've been teaching in business school.
Yeah.
You know.
Can you tell me, is there a spiritual side to your music? A spiritual element?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Especially, I think it's most evident in Excursion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that recording at all, but Excursion has Lovano and Craig Handy and Mortiam, the Senegalese drummer, who also was in Don Pullen's African Brazilian Connection, Danilo Perez, Marvin Smitty Smith. That recording is the most spiritual of all the recordings that I've had, and there is definitely a spiritual connection. And in fact, that is the direction that I'd like to actually get deeper into. You know, because that's more where I live than any of the other things that I've done.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the other things I'm proud of and I enjoy and all, but there's a certain depth to that. I mean, that's a kind of a record that you can't play for background music. You can't even keep it way low.
Okay.
You keep it way low. You can't play it for background music. It's just too intense and it's too dense. It's got too much going on. There's obviously something else happening.
Yeah. Would that be on your short list of things you've played on that you feel the best about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. I'd have to say, probably Excursion is one of the things that it's not that I'm most proud of. Because, for instance, like Hank and Billy, that record, I love the music on it. There's certain engineering values that I'm not too terribly excited about, but as far as, and forget their playing is always exemplary, but it's just the project and the way it came about and what happened as a result. I mean, when I listen to it, it's just a marvelous. Bill Amaze, the two recordings with Bill, I really enjoy. Just the two of us playing, and the John Hicks duo one that I love, and the one that no one will ever hear because it's tied up in litigation. And it's a great record. I produced that too, but more importantly, it's just the music on there. It's just so nice. In fact, I wish I had it with me right now. I'd like to listen to it. Yeah. But but my other records, Vignettes, for instance, I really enjoy it. 1, 2, 3, 4, this newest one. It's a little raggedy in spots, places that I would have preferred not to be, but hey, it's what it is. And the guys that are on the record, I mean, they actually. That's the thing about all the recordings that I've been lucky to have under my name. The guys have really given themselves. Uh-huh. I like to call it the Miles Davis theory of band leading, because these guys, you hire people because of their individual voices, and you put them together, not because you want them to make a sound that you think they should make, but because you hear what they do, and you want to put them together with their individual voices so that they will interact and make whatever sound comes out of that, and that's what Miles did. Yeah. Miles would always do that. Miles was not a person that said, I want you to sound like this, I want you to play like this. If anything, Miles said, you're not playing enough. It's just, I didn't hire you to sit here and look good, cute and everything. I hired you to just play, just be yourself. So that's the kind of ideal, that I'm always striving for.
Right.
So I guess, excursion kind of projects would give me the broadest palette at this point. Love to have a big band, some big band projects and whatnot. I did my first big band compositions, or arrangements rather, a couple of years ago for Lafayette College in Easton. And that was fun,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a challenge to actually do them. And so I'd love to do that some more. I mean, there's billions of things. My biggest project I want to do, my gospel project, well, not gospel, but it's the, you talked about spiritual, well, American spirituals.
Uh-huh.
I'd like to do, some of them would be black, some of them would be white, some of them would be Native American, some of them might be Asian American.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
But tunes considered spirituals or something close to that, where I actually go and rearrange it and, come up with another kind of, actually I got a bunch of ideas for some, I'm a Paul Robeson freak too. I've always loved Paul Robeson. There's a lot of material that he sang, and of course his story is, it's completely tragic. Certainly it's a political story for the 40s and 50s, definitely. You want to talk about what McCarthy did?
Yeah.
There's perfect example. Commie under every bush and all that silly.
Right.
Now we have a bush under every commie. So.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with.
Well, thank you, Mom.
Hope you can focus on some of those projects and.
Well, que sera, sera.